Ever so often, South Africans are introduced to the name of yet another young woman, but not for her unique personality, personal brilliance and achievements, but enragingly, because she would invariably have been maimed or killed in the country's raging gender-based violence and femicide epidemic. The names both reported in the national media and those that went unreported ring eternally as an indictment on the national conscience. From Uyinenene Mrwetyana to Tshegofatso Pule, Nosicelo Mtebeni to Reeva Steenkamp, and now add to that inexhaustive list, Olorato Mongale. The outrage is always predictable, but the track record of sustained, consistent action to stem the tide of violence against women, patchy at best. Let's welcome Dr. Lesley Ann Foster from Masimanyanne GBV organization, as well as Dr. Bongani Nkosi, who is a senior lecturer at the University of Limpopo. We do that because over and above talking about the broader issues of gender-based violence, there are aspects of the criminal law that we want to touch upon. In fact, I think, let me start there, Dr. Bongani Nkosi, and ask you, in the last few days, as we are learning more details about the especially the main suspect that was killed, in that encounter with police in KwaZulu-Natal, we learned that this is someone who had a case pending in KwaZulu-Natal, and then a case pending in Gauteng, in the area of Brakpan, but was out on bail. And invariably, this brings back that conversation about if you are arrested for kidnapping, to me it sounds like a really serious issue, a serious crime. How is it possible that this person could be out on bail when they were accused of such a serious crime? Is that all that we take into account, the seriousness of the crime, or are there other elements that come into play in this situation?
Thank you. Good afternoon to the viewers as well. I'll start by saying that in terms of standing criminal procedure in the Constitution, every accused person is presumed to be innocent until properly convicted by a court of law. And once a person has been arrested as a suspect, they have a right to have a bail application being considered. And then, of course, if it is in the interest of justice for them to be admitted on bail, they will be so admitted. In considering a bail application, the court will look at various factors, and some of them will be, among others, the inherent risk, such as whether such a person will skip the country, not stand trial, will they tamper with witnesses or investigations. A thorough job will then be conducted by the court, and if it is found that the suspect or the accused qualifies for bail, they will then be granted. The purpose of bail, Nosicelo, is simply to strike a balance between the person's liberty as well as the interest of justice such that when the trial is eventually concluded, the person will have been able to balance or to maintain his or her life.
Let me stick with you for a moment, Dr. Nkosi. I hear what you're saying, and the expression is, if it's in the interests of justice. Now with hindsight is 2020, and all of us can see now that it clearly wasn't in the interests of justice in this case for these two suspects having been arrested on a charge of kidnapping to have been released on bail. But many people are asking, surely kidnapping, and I know that the Criminal Procedure Act has certain crimes where the requirement is that actually you should show exceptional circumstances for you to be released on bail. Surely kidnapping belongs within that category. I mean, if you follow the timelines that are involved, the arrest of these two individuals was in April this year. Their vehicle that would later be used in the crime and the killing of Olorato was released to them at the beginning of May, around the 9th of May. So I'm just wondering about the categorization. Is it time to have that conversation that says we have unique problems? Kidnapping is one of those. And perhaps if it's not already in that schedule where you need to prove that, unique circumstances exist, perhaps it should be. All right, we seem to have a bit of a challenge with his line. Let me take that question to Lesley Ann Foster. Doc, thank you for joining the conversation as well. So we start off with just reflecting on, the latest details that are coming out as they relate to dealing decisively with what is clearly a problem and a crisis in our unique circumstances of gender-based violence and femicide, but also talking to the issues of the justice system and how it works. Your thoughts around the conversation we've been having the last few minutes, the issues around bail and perhaps the need to have a conversation about, do we still stick to the original intentions and criteria for bail, or do we need to have a conversation that says we have a problem in our country? Kidnapping is a growing problem and it's linking ever more with problems that already exist that include gender-based violence.
Good afternoon to everyone. I agree with you. I think that we have to have a different approach, because what we're seeing is a growing number of parolees or people out on bail are committing these heinous crimes, particularly crimes against women and girl children, which involves the femicide and the loss of life. So I think we need to be having what you're suggesting, a very different conversation about where and how we can change the perception now that, people are innocent until proven guilty. Obviously, that is an important principle. But what we also know is that in many cases, they go out to commit these heinous crimes in our society. And I think, in particularly in the case now of Olorato, we see that this was the way it played out. And one has to ask, what does the criminal justice system have to do to change the current trajectory that puts women at greater risk? I think that's a very, very serious question. And we do have to make some changes. We do have to have a conversation about what those changes should be.
Yeah. And Dr. Foster, if I stick with you for a moment, part of the reason I ask this question is that in conversations that have been happening recently, you've gotten a sense that people are completely fed up. And we're starting to get what some would say are extremist views that say actually the outcome where the main suspect ended up being killed in an encounter with police is actually the best outcome that was possible. There have been many, many voices that have been making that point. What are the risks if the criminal justice system as a whole, not just the judiciary, but from investigators to prosecutors to everyone along the chain of custody, a chain of command in the criminal justice system, unless they get their act together and respond as if we have a crisis, because we do?
Yes, I think that we do need to have retraining of the whole criminal justice system, the whole chain, because there are elements of the chain that don't take the crime seriously enough. I mean, even investigations, when you think about the murder of people, often there isn't any kind of consequences. The lack of accountability is very, very tenuous. And I think that those are the kinds of issues that we are concerned about. I think we should also be concerned about mob justice, because when communities become, when they reach the end of their tether, they want to take justice into their own hands. And very often that's not, the route that they should be taking, because there's no fairness and justice in that either. So it's a very tight rope that we are walking, but we do need to have a better way of responding to the crimes of, particularly we're talking about gender-based violence here. And sometimes it does involve kidnapping, abductions, as it was in the case of Olorato. I think the risk becomes very much higher. So we need this conversation about how do we better support women and reduce the risk to them of falling, victim to some crime that ends their lives at the end of the day. Definitely a conversation which the country needs to have now.
Dr. Nkosi, I believe I have you back on the line. So how do we reframe the conversation in your view? In particular, before we lost you there for a moment, I was asking about, in this particular instance, we were dealing with a crime committed after someone had been out on bail, having been arrested for what many would agree is a serious crime, the crime of kidnapping. At the point at which the person is arrested and is suspected of kidnapping, shouldn't the burden be higher than in the interest of justice, such that it's a reverse onus, as happens with the other, more serious crimes, to the extent that, I've not checked, but to the extent that kidnapping as a crime is not listed among those crimes where the onus is reversed to say, actually, show us that there are exceptional circumstances that exist for you to be out on bail.
Thank you, Tulasi. What happens is that in case of serious offences, when a bail application is brought, the onus, depending on the schedule, will then be on the accused person to show to the court that there are extenuating or compelling circumstances which will justify their release on bail. Unfortunately, I'm not privy to the actual bail application of this accused person to know exactly what actually transpired. But then in the long run, or the long and short of it, what I can say is that yes, kidnapping is one of the serious offenses. And I do believe that when bail was granted to the suspects, they took into account a number of factors. Hence, now they were found to qualify for bail. It is unfortunate that when one conducts a bail application, it is not always possible for the court to project their subsequent conduct. However, if the court is of the view that it is possible that this person may be a menace or danger to society, their release on bail may be accompanied by some conditions. For instance, reporting at the police station, not interfering or making any contact with the victim. The other issue we need to take cognizance of is that presently the Criminal Procedure Act is under review. There is a committee appointed by the President to look at specifically the provisions or the Criminal Procedure Act itself in its totality. You'll recall that this is an act which we inherited from the previous regime. So it is inevitable that it must be reviewed, such as to encompass all the issues.
All right, I've got to thank you for your time this afternoon. Let's leave it there. That's Dr. Bongani Nkosi, who is a senior lecturer at the University of Limpopo, as well as Dr. Lesley Ann Foster from the Masimanyanne Anti-Gender-Based Violence Organization, just weighing in on some of the issues to do with justice in cases of gender-based violence.